A dark room in Monroe, Connecticut. 2023. The walls are lined with glass cases, each containing an object: a rag doll with black eyes, a mirror with a cracked frame, inverted crucifixes, stained photographs. This is the Warrens Occult Museum, closed to the public for years. Above the door, a sign warns, "Do not knock, do not open, do not mock." In the center of the room, inside a special case, rests Annabelle, the ragged doll said to have been possessed by an evil spirit. Thousands of people came to see her for decades. Hollywood made millions from her story. But the question remains in the stale air of this room. Was there really something inside that toy, or only inside the minds of those who looked at her? Ed Warren died in 2006. Lorraine followed him in 2019, at the age of 92. Together, they built something no one had ever achieved before, turning demonology into a legitimate business. They weren't the first to investigate the paranormal, but they were the first to make it a globally recognizable brand. The numbers are staggering. They investigated more than 10,000 cases in half a century. They wrote numerous books. They inspired 8 Hollywood films that have grossed more than $2 billion. Their names are etched in popular culture as synonymous with the supernatural. But behind every famous case, there's another story. That of the skeptics who call them charlatans, that of the victims who accuse them of exploiting their pain, that of the researchers who debunk their claims one by one. To understand whether the Warrens were genuine or fraudulent, we need to do something they themselves rarely allowed. Examine the evidence without the filter of fear. We'll review their most famous cases, compare their claims with a historical record, and hear from those who supported them and those who denounced them. We won't seek to prove that ghosts exist or don't exist. That's not the right question. The right question is, did the Warrens genuinely believe in what they were doing, or did they always know they were constructing a lucrative lie? Were they sincere believers trapped in their own mythology, or were they conscious manipulators who took advantage of the desperation of others? Edward Warren Miney was born on September 7, 1926, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He is the eldest of 5 children in a working-class Catholic family. His father, a police officer, is also a violent alcoholic. Ed grows up in a home where fear is commonplace. According to his own account, never independently verified, Ed had his first paranormal experience at the age of 5. In the house his family rented, he claimed to see an apparition, a dark figure emerging from his bedroom closet night after night. His family attributed these visions to the nightmares of a frightened child. But Ed would maintain throughout his life that the house was haunted, that apartment marked his destiny. Here we find the first pattern, an unverifiable story, told decades later, conveniently explaining a future dedicated to the paranormal. Was that childhood experience real, or was it the first chapter of a narrative Ed constructed for himself? Lorraine Rita Moran was born on January 31st, 1927, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the same city as Ed, though in a different neighborhood. Unlike him, Lorraine grew up in a stable and devout home. Her mother was especially religious, a Catholic who saw divine signs in every coincidence. Lorraine would later claim that she possessed clairvoyant abilities as a child, that she could see auras around people, that she perceived invisible presences, that she experienced visions of the future. But there are no records of these abilities before she met Ed. No schoolmate remembers her as the psychic child. There are no early family accounts to corroborate these powers. What we do know is that Lorraine was deeply religious, deeply credulous, and deeply impressionable, the perfect seeds for what was to come. Ed and Lorraine meet at a colonial movie theater in Bridgeport in 1944. He is 17 and about to be drafted into World War II. She is 16 and works as an usher at that same theater. Ed will later note that it was love at first sight, a romantic statement that also suits the narrative they would construct together. They were married on May 7, 1945, when Ed returned briefly from military service in the Navy. Lorraine was 18. Ed was 19. They were devout Catholics who vowed before God to remain together until death do them part, and they will keep that promise for 61 years. But something else is brewing in this teenage marriage, an alliance that will transcend the romantic. Ed is charismatic, creative, and ambitious. Lorraine is sensitive, spiritual, and confident. He needs someone to validate his experiences. She needs someone to give her purpose. Together, without knowing it yet, they form the perfect combination to become the most influential paranormal investigators of the 20th century. After the war, Ed tries to make a living as an artist. He paints scenes from haunted New England houses and sells them door to door. He's not an exceptional painter, but he has a flair for history. When he knocks on doors, he doesn't just sell paintings. He sells a legend behind them. This is a Sutton mansion, he says, showing a dark oil painting. 3 people died here under strange circumstances. Some say they still walk the halls. People buy the paintings. But more importantly, they invite Ed in. They tell him their own stories. You know, weird things happen at my house, too. Ed listens. He takes mental notes. And he begins to see an opportunity. Lorraine accompanies him on these tours. Together they visit old houses, cemeteries, places with a reputation for being haunted. Ed draws. Lorraine feels, or claims to feel. Gradually, the paintings become secondary. The real commodity is the stories. In the early 1950s, Ed and Lorraine make a life-defining decision. They will stop being mere ghost story collectors and become active researchers. Ed begins to study demonology, self-taught, without formal credentials. He reads old Catholic books on demonic possession, exorcisms, and satanic manifestations. Crucially, Ed and Lorraine position themselves as Catholic investigators. They are not Victorian seance-style spiritualist mediums. They are not witches or occultists. They are devout Catholics fighting evil in the name of God. This distinction is brilliant. It protects them from accusations of being practitioners of the dark themselves, and it gives them access to the institutional authority of the Catholic Church. They present themselves as a complementary team. Ed is the demonologist who understands the nature of evil. Lorraine is the clairvoyant who can detect demonic presences. He brings theological knowledge. She brings psychic sensitivity. Together, they form an irresistible package for anyone who believes they're experiencing something supernatural. But let's return to the fundamental question. Why? Why would 2 young Catholics from Connecticut decide to dedicate their lives to chasing demons? There are 3 possibilities. First, they genuinely believed. Ed had childhood experiences that he interpreted as paranormal and built his identity around them. Lorraine was raised in a religious environment that validated the supernatural. Together, they reinforced each other's beliefs until the line between reality and conviction became invisible. Second, they were conscious opportunists. They saw a niche market, frightened people willing to pay for answers, and methodically exploited it. The childhood stories were retrospectively fabricated to legitimize a calculated career. Third, the truth is somewhere in the middle. They started out sincerely believing, but over time, as money and fame came, the line between genuine belief and commercial performance blurred until it disappeared. We don't have access to their private thoughts. We can't crack open their minds and examine their intentions. But we can do something better. Examine their actions, their cases, their methods. And in the record of what they did versus what they said, we will find our answer. The year 1952 marks the first known case the Warrens investigated. A house in New Haven, Connecticut, where a family reported unexplained noises and objects moving on their own. There are no detailed public records of this case, a pattern that would be repeated, but Ed would refer to it decades later as his baptism into paranormal investigation. What we do know is that by the mid-1950s, Ed and Lorraine had established a pattern of work, responding to calls from frightened families, spending time in supposedly haunted houses, taking photographs with period cameras, and determining whether or not there was genuine paranormal activity. But here's the problem. They never found a house that wasn't haunted. Of the thousands of cases they investigated over 50 years, they never, not once, publicly concluded, "We investigated this place and found absolutely nothing paranormal." This family isn't wrong. There was always something. There was always a presence. There was always a reason for them to be there. This statistically impossible event is the first big warning sign. And it's just the beginning. Let's rewind. It's 1952. The Warrens are 25 and 26 years old. America is in the midst of the Cold War. The fear of communism permeates every conversation. Families move to the suburbs in pursuit of the American dream. And in those new houses, in those perfect neighborhoods, people begin to hear things they can't explain. It's the perfect time for Ed and Lorraine to enter the scene. They're not the only paranormal investigators of the era. The United States has a long tradition of spiritualism, but they're the first to combine it with institutional Catholicism in a way that feels scientific, respectable, even heroic. The decision to position themselves as Catholic researchers is brilliant for multiple reasons. First, in the 1950s, the Catholic Church still had enormous cultural authority. If you say you work with priests, you automatically gain credibility. Second, Catholicism has a well-established demonology. They're not inventing concepts. They're using a 2,000-year-old belief system. Third, exorcisms are real within Catholic doctrine. The Church officially believes in demonic possession and has approved rituals to combat it. Ed and Lorraine don't need to convince anyone that demons exist. The Catholic Church already did that for them. They just need to convince people that they can identify them. Lorraine is crucial to the team's success. Ed can talk about demonology all he wants, but it's just talk. Lorraine offers something that seems more tangible. She says she can see and feel the presences. When they enter a house, Lorraine paces through the rooms with her eyes closed. She pauses in certain places. She shudders. She places her hand on her chest. "There's something here," she whispers. "I feel a male presence. He's angry. He's caught between worlds." The families watch, holding their breath. Finally, someone validates their experiences. But here's the problem. Lorraine's clairvoyant abilities were never tested under controlled conditions. She never accepted scientific challenges from skeptics. She never demonstrated her powers in settings where she couldn't use contextual clues or cold reading, techniques common among fraudulent mediums. James Randi, the famous debunker of paranormal frauds, publicly offered $1 million to anyone who could demonstrate psychic abilities under controlled scientific conditions. The Warrens never accepted. Their explanation: "We have nothing to prove." A convenient response for those who claim extraordinary powers. During this first decade and a half, the Warrens built their reputation locally. They investigated houses in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. They gave talks at churches and community centers. Ed showed his paintings of haunted places. Lorraine shared her experiences as a psychic. They're not famous. They're not rich. But they're laying the groundwork. Crucially, they're building relationships with local Catholic priests. They need these connections because their authority derives directly from the church. Without the priest's backing, they're just another eccentric couple with strange stories. And then the world changes. 1968 brings Rosemary's Baby, Roman Polanski's film about a woman pregnant with the devil's child. It's a massive hit. Suddenly, the demonic is in fashion. People want to be scared by the supernatural. Then comes 1973, The Exorcist. William Friedkin's film about the demonic possession of a 12-year-old girl becomes a cultural phenomenon. People line up for hours to see it. Some faint in theaters. Priests report a dramatic increase in requests for exorcisms, many from people who simply saw the film and convinced themselves they were possessed. Ed and Lorraine Warren are perfectly positioned to capitalize on this cultural shift. They've spent 2 decades preparing, and their time has finally come. The case that catapulted the Warrens to national attention involves a second-hand Raggedy Ann doll. According to their story, 2 nursing students, Donna and Angie, purchased the doll from an antique shop in 1970. They soon begin to notice strange behavior. The doll changes position when they aren't looking at it. They find notes written on childlike parchment that say, "Help us" or "Help Lou," and bloodstains appear on her dress. The students contact a medium who performs a seance. The medium declares that the doll is inhabited by the spirit of Annabelle Higgins, a 7-year-old girl who died on the grounds where the apartment building now stands. The spirit just wants to be loved. The students, feeling compassion, give the spirit permission to stay. But things get worse. Angie's boyfriend, Lou, begins having nightmares about Annabelle strangling him. One night, he wakes up feeling attacked. He finds claw marks on his chest. Terrified, the students contact a priest. The priest contacts the Warrens. Ed and Lorraine arrive and immediately declare that this isn't the spirit of a child. It's an inhuman demon who posed as a girl to gain the students' trust and gain access. Demons don't possess objects, Ed explains. They possess people, but they can manipulate objects to terrorize people and open the door to real possession. It's a terrifying narrative, and it's completely unverifiable. There's no physical evidence for any of these claims beyond the testimonies of the students and the Warrens. There are no photographs of the doll moving, no videos, no medically documented claw marks, just stories. The Warrens take the doll. A priest blesses the apartment. Activities supposedly cease. And Annabelle ends up in their Museum of the Occult, where it will remain for decades to come as their most famous artifact. But let's examine this story with a critical eye. First question, why did the students specifically contact the Warrens? In 1974, the Warrens were not yet nationally known. The most likely answer, a local priest recommended them, meaning they already had an established network for receiving referrals. Second question, Raggedy Ann dolls were mass-produced starting in 1918. Millions exist. Why is this particular one possessed? The Warrens would say, because a demon chose her. Skeptics would say, because two young, frightened students living alone began interpreting normal coincidences as supernatural. Third question, where is Annabelle Higgins? The Warrens claim that a child spirit was impersonating her, but they never investigated whether such a child actually existed. There are no records of any 7-year-old Annabelle Higgins deaths in that area. The child in the backstory appears to be entirely fictional, invented by the medium, adopted by the Warrens. Fourth question, the claw marks on Lou. There are no photographs, no medical documentation, only the testimony of someone who had just woken up from a nightmare. Sleep studies have widely documented that people can inflict wounds on themselves during episodes of parasomnia, or more commonly, that they can misinterpret pre-existing scratches after night terror experiences. The Annabelle case is emblematic of the Warren method. They take a story with strange but explainable elements, filter it through their demonological lens, and produce a terrifying narrative that cannot be refuted because it depends entirely on the supernatural. Annabelle establishes a pattern the Warrens will repeat for decades. First, they find frightened people with experiences they can't explain. Second, they validate those experiences as genuinely paranormal. Third, they elevate the narrative to the demonic. It's never just a ghost. There are always more sinister, dark forces at play. Fourth, they position themselves as the only ones with the knowledge to solve the problem. Fifth, they enlist the authority of the Catholic Church to lend legitimacy. Sixth, they take artifacts to their museum, preserving physical evidence they can display forever. It's an effective system, and it's about to be tested in its most controversial case to date. In 1975, Ed and Lorraine Warren are contacted about a case at an isolated Rhode Island farm. A family named Perron has been experiencing terrifying phenomena for years. This case will become their longest and most complicated investigation, and decades later, the basis of the film The Conjuring. But there's another case waiting in the wings in 1975, a case in Amityville, New York, that will transform the Warrens from regional investigators into national celebrities. A case that will generate books, movies, legal controversies, and accusations of fraud that will haunt the Warrens for the rest of their lives. The question is, are the Warrens ready for what's coming? Or are they about to get involved in something that will expose the limits or the falsity of their methods? The answer will reveal more about who Ed and Lorraine Warren really were than at any other point in their 5 decades of investigation. Because what happens in Amityville isn't just a ghost story. It's a story of greed, manipulation, and the question of how far people are willing to go for money and fame. A Dutch colonial house at 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. It's 3:15 a.m. 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. roams the house with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. Room by room, methodically, he shoots his family as they sleep. His father, Ronald Sr., his mother, Louise, his siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew. 6 people. 6 executions. Hours later, DeFeo bursts into a local bar screaming, "You have to help me. I think my parents were murdered." The police find the bodies, all face down, all in their beds. No neighbors heard the shots, even though the rifle was extremely loud. DeFeo initially blames a mobster. He later admits to the murders, but claims demonic possession. The jury doesn't believe him. In November 1975, he is found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. Sentence: 25 years to life on each count. He will die in prison in March 2021. Never released, never forgiven. This is the indisputable truth. A man killed his family. Everything else, everything the Warrens will say afterward, is built on this foundation of royal blood. December 1975. George and Kathy Lutz buy the house on Ocean Avenue for $80,000. A bargain considering it a large property by the canal. They know about the murders. They don't care. George, a Vietnam War veteran and surveyor, thinks it's just a house. Kathy brings 3 children from a previous marriage: Danny, 9, Christopher, 7, and Missy, 5. They moved in on December 18, 1975. A Catholic priest, Father Ralph Pecoraro, came to bless the house. Father Pecoraro allegedly heard a deep male voice ordering him to get out while blessing a second-floor room. He supposedly developed blisters on his hands that day. He warned the Lutzes not to use that room. Over the next 28 days, the family experiences, by their own admission, an escalating series of horrors. Freezing temperatures in certain rooms while others are normal. A hidden red room in the basement not shown on the floor plans. Swarms of flies in the middle of winter. Kathy levitating above the bed. Claw marks appearing on her body. George waking up every night at 3:15, the exact time of the murders. Youngest daughter Missy talking to an imaginary friend named Jody who manifests as a demonic pig with glowing red eyes. Slimy green matter dripping from the walls. Doors and windows opening by themselves. A ghostly marching band playing in the living room. On January 14, 1976, 28 days after moving in, the Lutzes flee the house in the middle of the night, leaving all their belongings behind. They never return. America's most famous haunted house story has been born. This is where the story gets revealingly sordid. George Lutz doesn't contact a paranormal investigator. He doesn't contact the church. He contacts a lawyer, William Weber. Why Weber? Because Weber is Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney. And Weber immediately sees an opportunity. Weber represents DeFeo in his appeal. He needs a new theory of the case. What better than the house was haunted and the demon made him kill his family? If the Lutzes experienced demonic phenomena in the same house, that could support DeFeo's appeal. But there's a problem. DeFeo's appeal fails. The judge rejects it. So Weber proposes something different. Why not turn this into a book? The Lutzes have a terrifying history. DeFeo has the backstory of real murders. Together, they can create something commercially explosive. And here is the crucial moment. Years later, in 1979, William Weber will enter a sworn statement admitting that he, George Lutz, and Kathy Lutz concocted this horror story over many bottles of wine. He will say that they fabricated the details while sitting around a table, deliberately constructing a narrative they could sell. The Lutzes deny this accusation. They're suing Weber, but the damage to their credibility has already been done. In February 1976, just a month after the Lutzes fled, Ed and Lorraine Warren are on the scene. It's unclear who contacted them first, but they're there investigating the now empty house with cameras, recorders, and their usual equipment. For the Warrens, Amityville is the case of their dreams. It's real. 6 people actually died there. It's recent, just 14 months earlier. And it's in New York, which means national media, not just regional. The Warrens spend time in the house. They take photographs. One in particular will become infamous. An infrared photo taken in the dark that supposedly shows a ghost child peering out from the stairwell. The Warrens claim no one else was in the house when the photo was taken. It's photographic evidence of the paranormal, except it isn't. Further analysis shows that the figure has features too distinct to be an artifact. Paul Bartz, one of the researchers present that night, would admit decades later that the figure was likely himself or another member of the team moving around the house. The photo was taken with a long exposure. Any movement would create exactly that kind of blurry image, but the Warrens promote the photo as genuine evidence. And it works. The media reprints it. It becomes iconic. The Warrens don't just confirm that the house is haunted. They elevate the story to epic proportions. According to their analysis, the house on Ocean Avenue is built on an ancient site where Shinnecock Indians performed rituals for the mentally ill and dying. The land itself is cursed. Evil spirits permeated the place long before the DeFeos. This claim is completely unverifiable and, according to local historians, probably false. There is no evidence that the Shinnecock used that specific site for any ritual purposes. But it sounds frightening and adds layers of historical malice to the narrative. The Warrens also claim that the basement's Red Room is a portal to hell, that Missy's imaginary friend Jody is a powerful demon, that the entire house is a nexus of concentrated demonic energy. It's not just a haunted house. It's a spiritual battlefield. Lorraine claims to have felt the most intense demonic presence of her career. Ed claims to have been physically attacked by entities during his investigation. These claims are never corroborated by other investigators present, but they become part of official Amityville canon. In September 1977, Jay Anson's The Amityville Horror, a true story, was published. The book, based on Anson's interviews with the Lutzes, is presented as nonfiction. It becomes a massive bestseller, more than 6 million copies sold. The film rights are immediately sold. The Warrens didn't write the book, but they're deeply involved in promoting it. They give interviews. They appear on television programs. They validate the Lutz's story as completely genuine based on their research. Their authority as demonologists lends weight to the book's claims. In July 1979, the film The Amityville Horror was released, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder. It was a box office hit, earning over $86 million against a budget of $4 million. Overnight, Amityville became the most famous haunted house in America, and the Warrens became national paranormal celebrities. But even as the Amityville machine generates millions, inconsistencies begin to appear. The first family to buy the house after the Lutzes, the Cromartys, report zero paranormal activity. They live there happily for years. "It's a wonderful house," they tell reporters. "Nothing unusual happens here." Later families report the same thing. No phenomena. No demonic presence. No frozen room. Just a normal colonial Dutch house by a canal. Weather records for January 1976 show normal temperatures, not the exceptionally brutal winter the Lutzes described. The Red Room turns out to be a small plumbing crawl space, painted red for practical reasons, clearly visible in the original house plans. Not some mysterious hidden room. Father Pecoraro, the priest who supposedly experienced phenomena during the blessing, gives contradictory statements. First, he confirms the events. Then he retracts them. Then he confirms them again. His testimony is so inconsistent as to be useless. Independent investigators interviewed the Lutzes' neighbors. No one saw or heard anything unusual during those 28 days. No ghostly marching band. No strange lights. No swarms of flies. Neighbors remember the Lutzes as a family that seemed under financial stress, not supernatural terror. And then comes a bombshell. In 1979, William Weber files his affidavit. He not only admits that the story was fabricated, he provides specific details about how he and the Lutzes deliberately constructed the narrative to maximize commercial potential. Weber is bitter that the Lutzes excluded him from the book's profits. His confession is partly revenge, but it's specific, detailed, and devastating to the Lutzes' credibility. The Lutzes respond by suing Weber for defamation. The case is settled out of court. The terms are not public, but the damage is done. The seed of doubt is permanently planted. The Warrens never recant. They never admit to having been duped. They continue to defend Amityville as genuine until the end of their lives. "We were there," Ed says. "We felt the presence. We don't care what the lawyer or the skeptic say. We know what we experience." Let's examine this with cold logic. Scenario 1. The house really was haunted. The Lutzes experienced genuine phenomena. The Warrens confirmed it. But magically, each subsequent family lived without incident. Did the demon simply leave? Did it decide it was no longer interested in the portal to hell? This is possible within a supernatural worldview, but tremendously convenient. Scenario 2. The Lutzes fabricated or massively exaggerated their experiences, possibly motivated by financial stress and the opportunity for profit. Weber admitted to participating in the fabrication. The Warrens, either because they were deceived or because they knowingly participated in the deception, validated a false story because it suited them professionally. Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually correct, overwhelmingly favors scenario 2. Amityville brought the Warrens national fame, but it also permanently scarred them. For its supporters, Amityville is proof that the demonic is real and that the Warrens are fearless warriors against the forces of darkness. For skeptics, Amityville is proof that the Warrens were, at best, easily fooled gullible people, or at worst, knowing accomplices in a lucrative fraud. What is indisputable is this. The Warrens gained enormous fame and likely significant amounts of money by promoting a story that shows multiple signs of being fabricated or massively exaggerated. They never publicly questioned the Lutzes. They never expressed doubts. When contradictory evidence emerged, they ignored or dismissed it. This pattern, validating dramatic stories without critical skepticism, ignoring contradictory evidence, and financially benefiting from promoting the supernatural, will be repeated in his most legally problematic case. Because in 1981, the Warrens will become involved in a case that will not only question their credibility, but will directly contribute to a murder, a case where their insistence on demonic possession will help a man escape justice for killing his landlord, a case that will expose the real dangers of their methods, the Arn Cheyenne Johnson case. The devil made me do it legal defense, and the Warrens will be at the center of the disaster. An apartment in Brookfield, Connecticut. 19-year-old Arn Cheyenne Johnson is having an argument with his landlord, 40-year-old Alan Bono. The argument is about money, about the rent, about pent-up tensions. Arnie's girlfriend, Debbie Glatzel, is present. His younger brother, David, is also there. Bono is drinking. The argument escalates. And then Arn Johnson pulls out a 5-inch pocket knife and stabs Alan Bono repeatedly, between 10 and 20 times, according to forensic reports. He doesn't stop when Bono falls. He continues stabbing the body on the ground. When he finally stops, Bono is dead. Arn has blood on his hands. Witnesses saw him do it. There's no ambiguity about homicide. Arn Cheyenne Johnson killed Alan Bono. The legal question is simple. Is he guilty of murder? The response of his lawyer, Martin Minella, is extraordinary. No. My client was possessed by a demon. The demon committed the murder. Arn Johnson is not responsible. This is the first time in American legal history that demonic possession has been presented as a formal defense in a murder trial, and Ed and Lorraine Warren are deeply involved in building this defense. To understand the trial, we must go back to July 1980. Arn Johnson is dating Debbie Glatzel, a young single mother. He spends time at the Glatzel family home in Brookfield. There, he meets David Glatzel, Debbie's younger brother, an 11-year-old boy. David begins to behave strangely. He has violent nightmares. He wakes up screaming that an old man with hooves, burned skin, and yellow eyes is attacking him. During the day, he becomes aggressive. He hits family members. He says things an 11-year-old boy shouldn't know. His voice changes. It becomes deeper, more threatening. The Glatzel family is devout Catholic. They interpret these behaviors as demonic possession. They contact their priest. The priest contacts the Warrens. Ed and Lorraine arrive and quickly confirm. David Glatzel is not mentally ill. He is possessed by multiple demons. Lorraine claims to count 43 different demonic entities inside the boy. It is, according to her, one of the most severe cases of possession they have ever seen. The Warrens arrange multiple exorcisms for David Glatzel. It's crucial to understand here. The Catholic Church has a formal and strict process for exorcisms. It requires extensive investigation, psychiatric evaluation, and episcopal approval. The rituals must be performed by specifically trained and authorized priests. The rituals performed on David Glatzel do not meet these criteria. They are what we might call deliverance blessings, prayers intended to expel demonic influences, but not formal exorcisms approved by the Church. This distinction is important because the Warrens consistently call these events exorcisms to give them greater dramatic weight. During one of these rituals, with the Warrens present, Arn Johnson supposedly offers himself as a sacrifice. "Take me instead," he cries. "Leave the boy alone." It's a dramatic and cinematic moment. And according to the Warrens, the demons accept the deal. They transfer from David to Arn. After the supposed demonic transfer, Arn Johnson begins to act strangely. According to family accounts, he has nightmares. He wakes up with no memory of where he is. He groans in his sleep. He sometimes speaks in voices that don't sound like himself. But he also continues to work normally at his tree maintenance job. He continues his relationship with Debbie. He drives. He pays bills. He functions in society. He doesn't seek psychiatric help. He doesn't seek a formal exorcism. If he really believed he was possessed by 43 demons, his behavior is strangely normal. And then, 6 months after the supposed demonic transfer, he stabs his landlord to death. Martin Minella, Arnie's defense attorney, faces a difficult case. There are witnesses. There is physical evidence. His client admits to killing Bono. The only hope of avoiding a murder conviction is to argue that Arn had no control over his actions. Typically, this is argued as temporary insanity or mental incapacity. But Minella takes a different route: genuine demonic possession. His argument is literal. Supernatural entities controlled Arnie's body. He didn't kill anyone. The demons did so, using his body as a vehicle. To support this defense, Minella relies heavily on the Warrens. He needs them to testify as experts in demonology. He needs them to confirm that Arn was genuinely possessed. He needs the story of the demonic transfer from David to sound credible to a jury. The Warrens happily accept. They give media interviews. Ed speaks extensively about the case on radio and television programs. He describes the details of the alleged demonic transfer. He confirms that this is genuine possession. Lorraine described the horrific entities she saw around Arn. But there's a problem, Judge Robert Callahan. When Minella formally presents the demonic possession defense, Callahan must decide whether to allow this theory to be presented to the jury. He holds hearings. He hears arguments. And on October 28, 1981, Judge Callahan issued his decision. No, demonic possession cannot be used as a legal defense. Why? Because there is no way to prove or disprove the existence of demons in a court of law. Allowing this defense would turn the trial into a theological circus rather than a legal proceeding. It's a devastating decision for Minella. Without the possession defense, all he has left is to argue that Arn acted in self-defense or under extreme provocation. These arguments are weak given that Arn was younger and stronger than Bono, and that he stabbed an unarmed man 20 times. The trial proceeds without mentioning demons to the jury. The evidence is clear. On November 24, 1981, after 15 hours of deliberation, the jury finds Arn Cheyenne Johnson guilty not of first-degree murder, but of first-degree manslaughter, a lesser sentence that recognizes no premeditation. Arn is sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He will serve 5 years before being released on parole in 1986. Alan Bono remains dead. His family never receives full justice for his murder, and the Warrens continue to promote the case as evidence of genuine demonic possession. They write about it. They give lectures about it. Decades later, it becomes the basis for The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, the third film in the Conjuring franchise. But let's examine what the Warrens consistently ignored or downplayed in this case. First, David Glatzel was 11 years old when he began showing symptoms. The behaviors his family described as possession, nightmares, aggression, personality changes, are consistent with multiple treatable psychiatric conditions, including trauma, stress disorder, or early-onset schizophrenia. There's no evidence that David was ever seen by a psychiatrist or psychologist before the Warrens became involved. The family jumped straight to a supernatural interpretation without ruling out medical causes. Second, Arn Johnson was 19 years old. He was under financial stress. He was having problems with his landlord. He was drinking on the day of the murder. These are known risk factors for impulsive violence. You don't need demons to explain why a young, frustrated, and drunk man might commit an act of violence. Third, the alleged demonic transfer occurred during a ritual not authorized by the church, witnessed primarily by people who already believed in possession. There is no independent verification. It is based entirely on the testimonies of believers. In 2007, 26 years after the events, Carl Glatzel, David and Debbie's older brother, finally speaks publicly. He sues the Warrens. Lorraine is still alive, and the publisher of a book about the case. His lawsuit alleges that the entire possession story was fabricated, that David was a mentally disturbed child in need of psychiatric help, and that the Warrens exploited the family during a vulnerable time. Carl claims David was mentally ill, not possessed, that the exorcisms traumatized the boy rather than helped him, that Arn Johnson was simply a violent man who killed someone and used a convenient excuse. The lawsuit is settled out of court, but Carl's accusations add another layer of doubt to Warren's version of events. A member of the Glatzel family, someone who was there, says it was a lie. Alan Bono is dead. He was stabbed 20 times by a 19-year-old. Arn Johnson spent 5 years in prison, time he possibly could have avoided or reduced if he had sought psychiatric treatment instead of exorcisms. David Glatzel, if he truly had a treatable psychiatric condition, was subjected to terrifying religious rituals rather than appropriate therapy. Carl Glatzel lost his family over this issue. The conflict over possession narrative apparently permanently divided the Glatzels, and the Warrens promoted all of this. They validated the demonic interpretation without apparently considering worldly alternatives. They participated in unauthorized rituals involving a minor. They provided expert testimony for a legal defense that, had it been successful, would have set a dangerous precedent where any violent crime could be excused as demonic possession. The Warrens would say they were helping, that they were fighting genuine evil, that they saved David Glatzel from demonic torment. But the observable result is a dead man, a murderer served reduced time, a child possibly deprived of psychiatric treatment, and a family torn apart. This is a human cost of treating belief in the supernatural as a medical diagnosis. The Warren Occult Museum is in full swing. The house adjacent to their Monroe residence has been converted into a sort of controlled tourist attraction. Ed gives limited tours, always with dramatic warnings. Don't touch anything. Don't make fun of anything. The objects are contained but still active. There are hundreds of objects. The Annabelle doll in its special glass case with warnings, mirrors supposedly used in satanic rituals, a cursed piano that no one should touch, a wedding dress worn by a woman who died at her wedding, toys of deceased children, crucifixes recovered from haunted houses, photographs of alleged ghosts, even a child's coffin. Each object has a story. Ed tells them with the skill of a born showman. People listen, fascinated and terrified. Some report feeling ill after visiting the museum, nausea, headaches, anxiety. The Warrens say it's the negative energy of the objects. Skeptics say it's the power of suggestion in a claustrophobic space filled with objects associated with death and suffering. By the mid-1980s, the Warrens had perfected a lucrative speaking circuit. They gave talks at universities, churches, community centers, anywhere that would hire them. Ed was a keynote speaker, charismatic, entertaining, capable of holding audiences captivated for hours. Lorraine added the emotional and spiritual element. The structure of his presentations is predictable but effective. Ed shows slides from his investigations, photographs of haunted houses, blurry images supposedly showing apparitions, audio recordings of unexplained noises. He recounts his most famous cases, Amityville, Annabelle, the possessions they investigated. Lorraine describes her experiences as a clairvoyant. She talks about seeing auras, sensing presences, and communicating with spirits. She often becomes visibly emotional, crying when recalling particularly terrifying encounters. Then comes the pitch. If you or someone you know is experiencing unexplained phenomena, the Warrens can help. They have connections with priests. They know the protocols. They've been doing this for decades. And while they never charge directly for research, they always emphasize this. They do accept donations to cover travel and equipment costs. Here's the awkward question. How much money did the Warrens make? There are no complete public records because they operated primarily through donations and speaking fees rather than a transparent corporate structure. But we can make educated guesses. Conferences. They charge between $500 and $2,000 per appearance, depending on the venue. They gave dozens of conferences a year. That's tens of thousands of dollars annually in talks alone. Books. They wrote or co-wrote several books about their cases. Although not all of them were bestsellers, they generated royalties. Film consultants. They were paid consultants on multiple Hollywood productions, most notably the Amityville films and later the Conjuring franchise. Interviews and media appearances. They appeared on countless television programs, documentaries, and paranormal specials. Some were paid. Others were free publicity for their lectures and books. They didn't become millionaires. Their Connecticut home was modest, and they didn't live ostentatiously. But they built a sustainable business based on the paranormal. And that business depended on one thing: continuing to find genuine cases of demonic activity. Here's the central problem with the Warren model. They had a massive financial incentive to find demons everywhere. Every confirmed case was potential fodder for books, lectures, and films. Every time they declared this house is genuinely haunted, they added another story to their repertoire. Compare this to how genuine science works. A researcher searching for a phenomenon must be able to conclude, I didn't find it, when the evidence doesn't exist. A doctor must be able to say you're healthy, even when that means there's no treatment to be billed. The ability to obtain negative results is fundamental to integrity. The Warrens never, not once in 50 years, publicly concluded that they investigated a case that turned out to be entirely explicable by mundane causes. Every house they investigated was haunted. Every person thought to be possessed was genuinely possessed. Their confirmation rate was 100%. This is statistically impossible if they're applying genuine scrutiny. Inevitably, some of the thousands of families who contacted them had homes with plumbing problems that sounded creepy, or relatives with undiagnosed mental illnesses, or simply overactive imaginations. But the Warrens never turned them away. They all had something paranormal going on. Let's examine the tools the Warrens used to detect paranormal activity. Audio recorders to capture electronic voices, EVPs. Cameras to photograph apparitions. Thermometers to detect cold spots that supposedly indicate ghostly presences. Religious objects such as crucifixes and holy water. None of these methods are scientifically valid. VPs can result from radio interference, auditory pareidolia, the brain finding patterns in random noise, or simple manipulation during editing. Photographs can capture dust, insects, lens artifacts, or be deliberately faked. Cold spots can result from drafts, poor insulation, or simple normal temperature fluctuations. Religious objects have no demonstrable mechanism for detecting the supernatural. Their effectiveness exists only within the framework of religious belief. If you believe holy water repels demons, then you'll feel it works when you use it. It's a spiritual placebo. But the Warrens presented these methods as if they were legitimate investigative techniques comparable to forensic science. They used technical jargon. They took measurements. They recorded data. They gave everything a veneer of empirical rigor, when in reality, there was nothing empirical about it. In 1986, the Warrens investigate the Snedeker house in Southington, Connecticut. The family, Alan and Carmen Snedeker with their 4 children, moves into an old house that, unbeknownst to them, was formerly a funeral home. Carmen Snedeker reports progressively more terrifying phenomena: apparitions of men in antique burial suits, embalming tools materializing, sexual attacks by unseen entities, her eldest son Philip showing signs of demonic possession. The Warrens investigate and confirm. The house is infested by necrophilic spirits. Spirits of the people who worked at the funeral home and supposedly committed immoral acts with corpses. It's an incredibly dark and disturbing narrative. The case became the subject of another book, In a Dark Place, the story of a true haunting by Ray Garton, published in 1992. But Garton, the writer hired to document the case, has a revealing story to tell. Ray Garton would publicly admit years later that the Snedekers told him completely contradictory stories. Carmen said one thing. Alan said something different. The details didn't match up. Events supposedly occurred at different times depending on who was talking. Garton took his concerns to Ed Warren. Ed's response was, "The truth is whatever you think the truth is. Just make a good book out of it." He was explicitly telling the writer not to worry about factual consistency, just to create a saleable narrative. Garton also noted that Philip Snedeker, the allegedly possessed son, had a documented history of schizophrenia and substance abuse. He was in treatment and had prescription medications. The behaviors the family attributed to demonic possession were consistent with his diagnosed psychiatric conditions, but the Warrens never emphasized these medical factors. To them, it was demonic possession, more dramatic, more marketable, more consistent with their brand. A pattern emerges when we examine multiple Warren cases. They identify families in crisis, usually with financial problems, mental illness, or extreme stress. They validate their worst fears. Yes, there is something evil here. They elevate the threat. It's not just a ghost. These are powerful demons. They position themselves as saviors. Only they can help. They document extensively, photographs, recordings, interviews for future use. They eventually monetize books, lectures, film consultancies. Families gain temporary validation from their religious experiences and rituals, which can provide psychological comfort. But they also become trapped in a narrative that can prevent them from seeking real help for medical or psychiatric problems. And the Warrens gain material for their next business venture. Is it exploitation? The Warrens would argue no, that they never charged directly for research, that they genuinely wanted to help, that they risked their own lives fighting evil. But the observable result is that they consistently benefited from other people's crises, and those people rarely ended up better off except psychologically if religious belief provided them solace. By the 1990s, the Warrens had an established reputation among both believers and skeptics. The organized skeptical community, including figures such as Joe Nickell, Benjamin Radford, and the aforementioned James Randi, began to systematically examine the Warrens' claims. Joe Nickell, a paranormal investigator with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, points out that the Warrens never document their investigations in a way that allows for independent verification. They don't publish their methodologies. They don't share raw data. They don't allow other researchers to replicate their findings. They operate in a closed-loop system where they control all information that is released to the public. Benjamin Radford notes that the Warrens' photographs are never subjected to professional third-party forensic analysis. When something strange appears in a photo, the Warrens declare it paranormal, without ruling out mundane explanations such as dust, insects, lens problems, or processing errors. Perry DeAngelis and Stephen Novella of the New England Skeptical Society document that many of the Warrens' specific claims about cases, dates, locations, participants, do not match verifiable historical records where they exist. The Warrens' response to skeptics is consistent. You weren't there. We were. We've seen things you can't explain. Your skepticism comes from not having experienced what we've experienced. It's an argument immune to refutation. No matter what evidence skeptics present, the Warrens can always retreat to the authority of their personal experience. And for their audience, people who want to believe in the supernatural, who have their own inexplicable experiences, this response is satisfactory. Ed frequently challenges skeptics. Come with us on an investigation. See for yourselves. Some agree, but the Warrens always control the conditions. Investigations take place in the dark. The families are already convinced there are presences. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation. Under these conditions, almost any normal noise in an old house is interpreted as paranormal. Skeptics who participate generally come away unconvinced. They report that they experienced nothing that couldn't be explained by normal causes, that the Warrens were generous in interpreting ambiguous evidence, that there was a lot of psychological suggestion involved. But the Warrens present these same investigations as confirmation of the paranormal. It's a dead end. Believers see confirmation. Skeptics see self-deception or fraud. And the truth remains elusive because of fundamental claims that demons exist and can possess people are unfalsifiable by design. Ed Warren suffers a massive stroke. He is 79 years old. He has dedicated over 50 years to investigating the paranormal. His body finally gives out. He dies quickly. Lorraine is by his side. The funeral is large. Hundreds of people attend. Families of Warrens helped, priests they worked with, paranormal investigators who consider them mentors, fans who follow their cases for decades. The eulogies are moving. Ed is remembered as a devoted man, a warrior against evil, a defender of the terrorized innocent. Lorraine is devastated. They've been together for 61 years. since they were teenagers. They built everything together. She's 79 too. The question is, will she continue on alone? The answer is yes. Lorraine Warren continues to lecture, appear on paranormal programs, and consult on cases. Her son-in-law, Tony Spera, married to her daughter Judy, becomes her main assistant and eventually the director of the Museum of the Occult. But without Ed, something changes. Ed was a showman, the one who controlled the narratives, the one who manipulated the media. Lorraine is softer, more grandmotherly, more emotional. The lectures become less about academic demonology and more about personal stories and religious faith. Culture is also changing. By 2010, the internet has transformed how people consume paranormal content. You no longer need to attend conferences. You can watch videos on YouTube. You no longer need to buy books. You can read testimonies on forums. The Warrens are becoming relics of a previous era. And then something unexpected happens. Hollywood rediscovers the Warrens. Director James Wan, known for horror films like Saw and Insidious, decides to make a film about one of the Warren cases, the Perron family in Rhode Island. The Conjuring opens on July 19, 2013. It's a massive hit. It earns $318 million against a $20 million budget. Critics are positive. Audiences love it. And crucially, it features Ed and Lorraine Warren as the heroic, empathetic heroes played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. Suddenly, the Warrens are relevant again. A new generation is discovering their cases. Lorraine, now 86, is again interviewed extensively. She consults in the film and its sequels. The Museum of the Occult experiences renewed interest. The success of The Conjuring spawned an entire franchise. Annabelle in 2014, focusing on the possessed doll. The Conjuring 2 in 2016, about the Enfield case in England, another controversial Warren case. Annabelle, Creation in 2017. The Nun in 2018. The Curse of La Llorona in 2019. Annabelle Comes Home in 2019. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It in 2021, about the Arn Johnson case. Collectively, the films in the Conjuring universe have grossed over $2 billion. The Warrens, who died not extremely wealthy, posthumously became the basis for one of the most successful horror franchises in history. But here's the irony. The films present highly dramatized and fictionalized versions of the cases. They add elements that were never in the original reports. They create supernatural jump scares that never happened. They turn already questionable stories into even more exaggerated horror fantasies. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter in the family whose experience inspired the first Conjuring film, has written extensively about her time with the Warrens. Her perspective is complicated. On the one hand, she claims that her family did indeed experience unexplained phenomena on their Rhode Island farm during the 1970s. She maintains that something genuinely strange was happening. On the other hand, she is extremely critical of how the Warrens handled the case. According to Andrea, the Warrens sensationalized and exaggerated what happened. They pushed for an exorcism that traumatized her mother. They were more interested in creating material for their lectures than actually helping the family. When the parents finally asked the Warrens to leave, Ed allegedly became angry. He had promised them a dramatic case for his lectures. Andrea also notes that The Conjuring is massively inventive. The climax, a dramatic exorcism where Lorraine saves Mother Perron from killing her children, never happened that way. It's fiction created for cinematic purposes. So we have a family who believe they experienced something paranormal, but who also accuses the Warrens of exploitation and exaggeration. It's a nuanced account that complicates the simplistic narrative of the Warrens were saints or the Warrens were total frauds. The Conjuring 2 is based on the Enfield case in England in 1977. A family in a London suburb, single mother Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children, reports extreme poltergeist activity. Furniture moving on its own. Guttural voices coming from the 11-year-old daughter Janet. Objects being thrown across rooms. The Society for Psychical Research sends investigators. Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair document the case extensively. The Warrens visit briefly, very briefly, one day, according to records, and declared genuine demonic possession. But even at the time, there was enormous skepticism. Jana Hodgson was captured on video multiple times faking phenomena, bending spoons when she thought no one was looking, throwing objects herself. She admitted to investigators that she faked some events only 2% of the time, an admission that suggests an awareness of manipulation. The lead investigators, Gross and Playfair, believed the majority of the case was genuine, despite some falsification. Other investigators who examined the evidence concluded that it was likely all fraud or misinterpretation of normal events. The Enfield case remains deeply controversial, even among paranormal investigators. But the Warrens had no doubts. To them, it was clearly demonic. And decades later, Hollywood turned their interpretation into a hit horror film that presented the case as unquestionably supernatural. Lorraine Warren dies at 92 in her home in Connecticut. She has outlived Ed by 13 years. To the end, she maintains that everything she and Ed investigated was real. She never publicly expresses doubt. She never recants any case. Her funeral is more private than Ed's. She is 92 years old. Many of her contemporaries have already died, but hundreds still attend. Eulogies remember her as a woman of faith, a genuine visionary, someone who dedicated her life to helping others. Tony Spera has completely taken over the Occult Museum. He continues to give limited tours. The museum is closed to the general public, supposedly because it's too dangerous, the artifacts too active. Skeptics suggest it's because intense public scrutiny would reveal them to be simply antiques in a room. In 2023, the Warren Occult Museum still exists but remains closed to regular visitors. Tony Spera occasionally hosts virtual events or very limited media tours. Annabelle remains in its display case. The warnings remain on the walls. There are no scientific studies of the objects. There are no analyses by art historians or anthropologists to determine if they truly have the origins the Warrens claimed. There is no controlled paranormal investigation using modern equipment. The museum is more of a mausoleum than a laboratory. This is emblematic of the Warren legacy. Objects with dramatic stories, but no verification. Extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. An empire built on testimony and faith, immune to empirical scrutiny. After examining 50 years of Warren cases, after reviewing their methods and their controversies, after hearing from their defenders and detractors, we return to the original question. Were Ed and Lorraine Warren genuine investigators or frauds? The honest answer is probably somewhere in between, and it probably changed over time. It's plausible that they started out as sincere believers. Ed traumatized by a difficult childhood, Lorraine raised in intense Catholicism, both genuinely convinced they'd experienced the supernatural. It's plausible that in their early years, they genuinely believed they were helping people, that when they declared a house haunted, they did so because they genuinely interpreted ambiguous evidence as supernatural, not because they were consciously lying. But it's also undeniable that they built a lucrative business on these beliefs, that they never encountered a case that didn't confirm their assumptions, that they consistently exaggerated and dramatized, that they benefited financially from other people's crises, that they promoted supernatural interpretations that potentially prevented people from seeking genuine medical or psychiatric help. The Warrens' legacy is deeply divided. For millions of believers, especially devout Catholics, the Warrens were holy warriors who fought real evil in a world that rejected the spiritual. They provided comfort to terrified families. They validated experiences that science dismissed. They kept alive the belief that there is a spiritual realm beyond the material. For skeptics and rationalists, the Warrens represent the dangers of pseudoscience. They exploited credulity. They promoted superstition over reason. They potentially harmed vulnerable people with their demonological interpretations of what were medical or psychiatric problems. And they got rich doing it. For Hollywood, the Warrens are perfect characters, real figures with terrifying stories ripe for adaptation. The truth or falsity of their claims is irrelevant to entertainment. And for historians of the paranormal, the Warrens are fascinating as a cultural phenomenon. How they managed to turn demonology into a recognizable brand, how they navigated the gap between religion and commerce, how they survived decades of controversy to emerge as cultural icons. The full truth about Ed and Lorraine Warren probably died with them. We can't crack open their skulls and examine their true beliefs. We can only judge by their actions, and their actions show a consistent pattern of promoting the supernatural without critical skepticism, profiting from those promotions, and ignoring contradictory evidence. They were, at best, sincere believers whose faith blinded them to self-deception. At worst, they were conscious manipulators who exploited fear and superstition. And the truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes, a complicated and very human mix of genuine belief, gradual self-deception, and rationalization of increasingly questionable behaviors as the financial reward grew. There's a reason science has never confirmed the existence of ghosts, demons, or supernatural possessions despite decades of paranormal research. If these phenomena existed as the Warrens claimed, as entities capable of physically interacting with our world, they should be detectable, measurable, repeatable. The Warrens claim that demons can move objects. That requires physical strength. Physical strength is measurable. The Warrens claim that possessions change people's voices and behavior. Those are neurological changes. Neurological changes are detectable with modern medical technology. The Warrens claim that haunted houses have abnormal temperatures. Temperature is directly measurable with extreme precision. So why has no scientific laboratory ever confirmed these phenomena under controlled conditions? The believer's response is that the supernatural cannot be studied with scientific methods, that it operates outside of natural laws. But this response is convenient to the point of suspicion. It basically says, these phenomena exist, but only when we cannot properly measure them. Let's examine scientific explanations for the phenomena people interpret as paranormal. First, pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to find meaningful patterns in random stimuli. It's why we see faces in clouds, figures in shadows, and hear voices in white noise. When the Warrens played audio recordings with static and said, "Listen here, the demon says get out of here," they were taking advantage of auditory pareidolia. Once they tell you what to listen for, your brain finds that pattern in the noise even if it doesn't objectively exist. It's the same principle as songs that supposedly contain satanic messages when played backward. Your brain imposes order over chaos. Second explanation, infrasound, sound waves below the range of conscious human hearing, below 20 hertz. Infrasound is produced by natural phenomena such as storms and earthquakes, but also by artificial sources such as fans, compressors, and even wind passing over certain architectural structures. Scientific research has shown that exposure to infrasound can cause feelings of anxiety and dread, a sense of presence, chills, blurred vision, because infrasound can make your eyes vibrate, nausea, basically many of the symptoms people report in haunted houses. In 1998, Vic Tandy, a British engineer, investigated why his laboratory felt haunted. People reported apparitions and peripheral vision, unexplained discomfort. He discovered a source of infrasound at 19 hertz produced by a fan. When he removed it, the phenomena ceased. How many of the houses the Warrens declared haunted simply had infrasound sources? We'll never know because they never measured that variable. Third explanation, carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, and can leak from furnaces, water heaters, or poorly maintained chimneys, exactly the type of equipment found in older homes where hauntings are frequently reported. Symptoms of carbon monoxide exposure include confusion, visual and auditory hallucinations, feeling of being watched, memory loss, headaches, nausea, malaise. Read that again. They're virtually identical to the symptoms of living in a haunted house. There have been documented cases where families convinced their homes were haunted discovered carbon monoxide leaks. Once repaired, the ghosts disappeared. This isn't speculation. It's measurable and replicable. Did the Warrens ever bring carbon monoxide detectors to their investigations? There's no evidence of that. They jumped straight to demonological explanations without ruling out dangerous but mundane environmental causes. Fourth explanation, undiagnosed psychiatric conditions. We already mentioned schizophrenia in the context of the Snedeker case. But there are dozens of conditions that can cause the symptoms the Warrens attributed to possession. Schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations, disorganized thinking, bizarre behavior, manic phase bipolar disorder, impulsive behavior, rapid speech, reduced need for sleep, grandiose ideas, temporal lobe epilepsy, sensations of presence, mystical experiences, personality disturbances during episodes, dissociative disorder, personality changes, memory loss, out-of-character behavior, drug or alcohol toxicity, paranoia, hallucinations, violent behavior. All of these conditions are medically treatable. But if a family interpreted the symptoms as demonic possession and contacted the Warrens instead of psychiatrists, the sick person didn't receive appropriate treatment. Instead, they received exorcisms that were potentially more traumatizing. Fifth explanation, psychological effects of belief and suggestion. If you're told your house is haunted, you'll begin to interpret normal events as paranormal. The creaking of water pipes becomes ghostly footsteps. The shadows of trees moving across a streetlight become apparitions. Your dog barking at nothing becomes evidence of unseen presences. The Warrens didn't just investigate houses. They transformed the family's perceptions of their homes. They arrived with their expert authority, their histories of previous cases, their technically savvy equipment, and declared, "Yes, there's something here." From that moment on, the family was predisposed to find confirmation of the supernatural in every ambiguous event. This is especially powerful in children. If they see authoritarian adults scared and talking about demons, their imaginations run wild. They may begin reporting experiences they never had, or misinterpreting normal experiences, or even unconsciously fabricating them to get attention. They're not lying maliciously. They're responding to social cues and creating memories consistent with the narrative surrounding them. Here's the problem with arguing with genuine believers. Every alternative explanation can be ruled out by appealing to special cases. Infrasound? But this case had no infrasound sources. Carbon monoxide? It was checked. There was no leak. Mental illness? The doctors found nothing wrong, except that these exclusions are often not properly documented. It was verified by whom, when, using what methods? The doctors found nothing. But which doctors, what tests were performed, and did they go to appropriate specialists? The Warrens operated in an environment where the burden of proof was reversed. In science, if you claim something extraordinary, that demons exist and can possess people, you need extraordinary evidence. But in the Warren world, if you couldn't definitively prove a mundane cause, they defaulted to the supernatural. This is logically flawed. We don't know what caused this phenomenon doesn't equate to therefore it was a demon. There's a massive intermediate category of we don't know yet. Let's continue investigating with empirical methods. The Catholic Church deserves special scrutiny here. By associating with the Warrens, by providing them with access to priests, by permitting rituals, even unofficial ones, the Church gave institutional legitimacy to unproven paranormal claims. The official position of the Catholic Church is that Satan and demons exist as real entities, that demonic possession can occur, and that exorcisms are valid rituals. However, the Church also has strict protocols, requiring a full psychiatric evaluation before considering an exorcism, ruling out all possible medical causes, requiring episcopal approval, and only specifically trained priests can perform the official ritual. The Warrens frequently worked outside these protocols. They performed or facilitated deliverances that were not officially sanctioned exorcisms. They declared possessions without completing the required evaluations. And the Church, for the most part, looked the other way, probably because the Warrens promoted traditional Catholic beliefs in an increasingly secular age. But this created a dangerous situation. Families thought they were receiving the full authority of the Catholic Church when in fact they were receiving unauthorized rituals facilitated by self-proclaimed researchers. The fundamental problem with the Warren approach is that it promotes magical thinking over critical thinking. When you face a frightening problem, strange noises in your house, worrisome behavior in your child, you have options. Option A, investigate systematically. Check the home's mechanical systems. Consult doctors and specialists. Measure environmental variables. Consider psychological explanations. Only after exhausting mundane causes. Consider the extremely unlikely. Option B. Call in demonologists who will confirm your worst supernatural fear, perform religious rituals, and leave you with the belief that cosmic forces of evil have specifically targeted you. Option A may resolve the real problem. Option B provides dramatic narrative, but likely doesn't address underlying causes, and potentially causes additional psychological harm, especially to children. To be fair, there is one area where the Warrens probably helped: the psychological placebo effect. If a family genuinely believes their house is haunted, they are experiencing real fear, real stress, and real disrupted sleep. If the Warrens come, perform rituals, declare the house cleansed, and the family believes that, then the stress decreases. They sleep better. They feel safer. Their quality of life improves. This is valid. Psychological comfort is valuable, but it doesn't prove that there were real demons. It proves that religious ritual can provide psychological relief for people with religious beliefs, something psychologists have long understood. The Warrens could have provided the same service without claiming to be combating real supernatural entities. They could have said, "We understand you're scared. We're going to perform blessings that, within your framework of faith, can help you feel more secure." But that would have been less dramatic, less marketable, less the basis for lectures and books. Instead, they consistently insisted that everything was literal, real, objectively supernatural. And that insistence is where they crossed over from purveyors of religious comfort to promoters of false claims about reality. We've traveled through 5 decades of Ed and Lorraine Warren's career. We've examined their most famous cases: Annabelle, Amityville, Arn Johnson, the Snedekers, the Museum of the Occult. We've heard from their defenders and their detractors. We've considered alternative scientific explanations. Now we must reach a verdict. The preponderance of evidence suggests the following: Ed and Lorraine Warren probably began as sincere believers with genuine religious fervor. Ed had a difficult childhood that predisposed him to interpret ambiguous experiences as supernatural. Lorraine was raised in a Catholic environment that validated mystical visions and experiences. When they bonded, they reinforced each other's beliefs until they became inflexible. But sincerity of belief doesn't equal accuracy of perceptions. People can genuinely believe false things, and the Warrens constructed a system of interpretation, Catholic demonology, that allowed them to interpret virtually any phenomenon as evidence of the supernatural. As the years passed and the paranormal business became lucrative, the incentives changed. Each confirmed case meant material for conferences. Each dramatic story meant potential for books and eventually movies. The Warrens became less investigators and more showmen. This doesn't necessarily mean they started consciously lying. Human self-deception is powerful. When your reputation, your income, and your entire identity are built on being an expert on demons, you develop cognitive blindness to contradictory evidence. You begin to see what you need to see. James Randi, the famous fraud debunker, had a saying, "No matter how smart you are just as good at fooling yourself." The Warrens may have gradually crossed over from sincere believers to people trapped in a narrative they couldn't abandon without destroying everything they'd built. Regardless of their intentions, the Warrens caused measurable harm. In the Arn Johnson case, their testimony contributed to a legal defense that, had it succeeded, would have set a dangerous precedent. One man killed another, and the Warrens validated a supernatural excuse. In multiple cases where children displayed symptoms consistent with mental illness, the Warrens promoted demonological interpretations that potentially delayed appropriate psychiatric treatment. In Amityville, they promoted a story rife with signs of fraud, exploiting a family's crisis to build their own fame. In countless minor cases never widely publicized, they provided supernatural validation to people who might have been better served by electricians, plumbers, pest control specialists, or therapists. And fundamentally, they promoted a worldview where magical thinking replaces critical thinking, where fear of the demonic takes priority over rational understanding, where self-proclaimed religious authority replaces verifiable experience. But let's be fair to the pro-Warren argument. Its defenders would say, they can't prove demons don't exist. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The Warrens helped thousands of terrified families. They provided comfort when no one else would. Their Catholic faith was genuine. They risked their own lives investigating dangerous places. They never charged directly for investigations. All of this is technically true. We can't definitively prove that there are no demons. It's impossible to prove a universal negative. The Warrens did provide psychological comfort to many families. Their Catholicism seemed sincere. And technically, they didn't charge direct fees for specific investigations. But these points don't absolve the fundamental questions about his methods and claims. "You can't prove me wrong" is an extremely weak defense when you make extraordinary claims. The burden of proof rests on those making extraordinary positive claims, not on skeptics. Let's consider the full spectrum of possibilities about who the Warrens were. Extreme 1, genuine saints. Everything they said was true. Demons exist. Possessions are real. The Warrens were fearless warriors against literal evil. Every case they investigated involved genuine supernatural phenomena. This position requires accepting that thousands of years of scientific research have failed to detect entities that, according to this view, regularly interact with the physical world. Position 2, sincere but misguided believers. Ed and Lorraine genuinely believed in what they did, but they were profoundly mistaken. They consistently misinterpreted natural phenomena as supernatural due to cognitive bias, psychological effects, and total immersion in a religious framework of belief. They weren't conscious frauds, but they weren't accurate researchers either. This position makes them sympathetic, but fundamentally unreliable. Position 3, believers who became marketers. They started out sincerely believing, but as money and fame came, they gradually crossed ethical lines. They began exaggerating, deliberately ignoring contradictory evidence, and promoting cases they knew were questionable because they were good for business. They weren't outright frauds from the start, but they evolved toward ever greater ethical compromises. This position recognizes human complexity. People can hold contradictory beliefs and rationalize problematic behaviors. Position 4, conscious manipulators from the start. Ed and Lorraine never truly believed. They saw a business opportunity in exploiting fear and superstition. Every case was a calculated performance. Every piece of evidence was fabricated or deliberately exaggerated. They were pure con artists operating on a long-term basis. This position makes them villains, but it requires believing they maintained a complex deception for 5 decades without ever breaking character, even in private. Extreme 5, something in between that change over time. Human reality is messy. Ed and Lorraine probably held genuine beliefs while simultaneously making questionable business decisions. They probably engaged in self-deception while also consciously exaggerating. They probably helped some people while harming others. Their motivations and honesty probably varied from case to case, year to year, as they aged and their circumstances changed. Based on the totality of the evidence, the most likely position is number 3, or the middle. The Warrens began as sincere believers, but gradually made ethical compromises as their careers became more lucrative. They were neither pure villains nor pure saints. They were complex humans navigating tensions between genuine belief, commercial ambition, the need for validation, and the pressures of maintaining their reputations. Evidence for this conclusion includes its 100% confirmation rate over 50 years, statistically impossible for honest researchers applying critical scrutiny, his willingness to promote cases like Amityville despite multiple signs of fraud, their involvement in the Arn Johnson case, where they validated a morally questionable legal defense, his consistent refusal to participate in controlled scientific testing of Lorraine's abilities. Their business model created massive financial incentives to find demons everywhere. Testimony from writers like Ray Garton, who report that Ed Warren explicitly told him to prioritize saleable narrative over factual accuracy. Their evolution from local investigators to national celebrities as they progressively exaggerated their cases. At the same time, there's evidence of genuine belief. His lifelong Catholic devotion does not appear to have been a performance. Testimonies from people close to them who believe that Ed and Lorraine sincerely believed what they said. Their willingness to invest time in cases that did not generate significant financial benefit. The consistency of his narrative over 5 decades. Difficult to maintain if it were entirely fabricated. Regardless of the truth about the Warrens personally, their cultural impact is undeniable. They popularized demonology in America in ways that persist today. They established narrative templates for haunted house and possession stories that Hollywood still uses. They inspired generations of amateur paranormal investigators. They kept traditional religious beliefs relevant in a secular age. But they also normalized pseudoscience. They promoted the idea that personal testimony is equivalent to empirical evidence. They taught millions that critical skepticism is a lack of faith rather than a valuable tool for discerning the truth. They potentially misled people with genuine medical or psychiatric needs towards supernatural interpretations. Their legacy is, like their lives, deeply mixed and complicated. What can we learn from the Warrens in 2025? Several important lessons. First, sincerity of belief does not guarantee accuracy. You can passionately believe something false. Intensity of conviction is not evidence of truth. Second, when someone benefits financially from promoting certain claims, it creates a massive conflict of interest that must be considered when evaluating their credibility. The Warrens weren't neutral researchers. They were financially incentivized promoters. Third, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I've seen things I can't explain is not sufficient evidence to claim that, therefore, demons exist. There's a massive logical gap between these positions. Fourth, critical thinking and skepticism are not enemies of genuine spirituality. They are tools for distinguishing truth from self-deception. Religious people should be the first to want to make sure they are not being deceived about the supernatural. Fifth, psychological comfort has value, but it doesn't validate the underlying factual claims. If a religious ritual makes you feel better, that's legitimate. But I feel better doesn't prove that there was a real demon that was cast out. There's one question about the Warrens we'll never be able to definitively answer. What did they privately believe? In their most intimate moments, when they were alone, when no one was watching, did they truly believe they had battled real demonic entities? Or was there a part of them that knew they were constructing narratives, interpreting liberally, exaggerating for dramatic effect? They died without publicly confessing. There are no audio tapes of Ed admitting, "We don't really believe in any of this." There's no diary of Lorraine writing, "I know my psychic abilities aren't real." The only testimony we have is her consistent public assertions that it was all genuine, so we're left with ambiguity. And perhaps that's appropriate. Humans are complex. We can hold contradictory beliefs. We can deceive ourselves while consciously manipulating. We can genuinely want to help while also wanting money and fame. We're not consistently one thing or the other. Ed and Lorraine Warren were probably just as complicated and contradictory as the rest of us, only they built an entire career on unverifiable claims, in a field with no accountability mechanisms, promoting beliefs that could cause real harm when substituted for medical or scientific understanding. So, after this exhaustive journey through the lives and cases of Ed and Lorraine Warren, what's the verdict? They were not legitimate scientific researchers. Their methods failed to meet any standards of rigorous empirical research. They did not publish in peer-reviewed journals. They did not subject their findings to independent verification. They did not use appropriate controls or measurements. They could not replicate results under controlled conditions. They probably weren't complete conscious frauds. The evidence suggests they had some level of genuine belief in what they were doing, at least initially. Their Catholicism seemed sincere. Their dedication was real. They definitely made significant ethical compromises. They promoted questionable cases, like Amityville. They validated problematic legal defenses, like that of Arn Johnson. They created conflict of interest by financially benefiting from finding the paranormal everywhere. They ignored alternative explanations that could have genuinely helped people. They provided comfort to some while potentially harming others. For families who simply needed validation and religious ritual, the Warrens likely provided psychological assistance. For families with members who needed medical or psychiatric intervention, the Warrens likely delayed or prevented appropriate treatment. Their legacy is cultural rather than factual. They did not prove the existence of the supernatural. They did not contribute to verifiable human knowledge. But they did create culturally powerful narratives that persist in films, books, and the popular imagination. The final verdict: Ed and Lorraine Warren were sincere believers who became questionable promoters, operating in a field without accountability, making extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence, profiting from the crises of others, and leaving a mixed legacy of comfort for some and potential harm for others. They weren't perfect heroes fighting literal evil. They weren't pure villains swindling innocent people. They were complicated humans, navigating tensions between faith and commerce, belief and evidence, helping and exploiting. And the most important lesson is this. When someone claims a special knowledge of the supernatural, when they profit from those claims, when they reject independent verification, we should maintain healthy skepticism while also respecting the genuine spiritual needs of people seeking answers to terrifying experiences. The demons the Warrens pursued for 50 years probably didn't exist outside the minds of those who believed in them. But the fear, the suffering, and the need for meaning that drove people to seek out the Warrens, those were absolutely real. And perhaps that is the most important truth of all.